In 1218, a caravan of Mongol merchants traveling to the great Western Empire of the Kharazm Shah were stopped and then executed as spies. Genghis sent an envoy to demand an explanation. When the envoy was also executed, Genghis Khan was furious. Revenge was inevitable. The Kharazm Shah's empire was fabulously wealthy, especially the cities, for they lay along the Great Silk Road from China to the Middle East. The greatest of these cities was the capital, Samarkand, which the Kharazm Shah had turned into an opulent pleasure palace. Here lived Chinese and Persian artisans who wove silk, worked leather, produced silver lame, wove carpets, and even forged an early type of steel. It was a lively, cosmopolitan society. The Kharazm Shah himself was a vain creature, fated by his courtiers as the second Alexander the Great. He believed their flattery and was confident he could handle this arrogant barbarian called Genghis Khan. Genghis took his time. Indeed, he took a year to prepare for the campaign. He withdrew his army from China, summoned men from every corner of the steppe, and put together the greatest concentration of Mongol power ever seen. Estimates put the Mongol army at more than 100,000, but it was probably still less than half the size of the Kharazm Shah's forces. Before setting out, Genghis sent word to the king of Xixia, calling in his promise to provide troops whenever they were needed. But the king replied that if Genghis didn't have enough men, then he didn't deserve to be the great Khan. As Genghis turned his army west, he resolved one day to avenge this insult. The Mongols faced a march of more than 1,500 miles towards their objective, the cities of BukHara and Samarkand. Their spies had told them that the Kharazm Shah had deployed his defenses along the Sir Darya River, the empire's frontier. Genghis divided his army into 4 separate divisions, 3 of which attacked the frontier at several points at once. The 4th and largest contingent, led by Genghis himself, secretly crossed the Sir Darya River further north, and then promptly disappeared. Instead of turning south towards the enemy lines, Genghis led his army due west, straight into the Kizil Kum desert. The Kizil Kum was impenetrable. There were no known waterholes, no roads, no landmarks. But Genghis had a guide who did know a route through the wasteland. For months, his contingent made its way secretly across the sands. Then, in March 1218, as the defending armies used up their strength against the other Mongol attacks, Genghis suddenly emerged, over 400 miles behind their lines, outside the walls of BukHara. Military historians still point to it as one of the most dramatic outflanking movements in the history of warfare. Panic swept through the city, and shortly afterwards, the BukHara garrison abandoned their posts. Once inside, Genghis and his men galloped into what they imagined was a palace. When it was explained that he was inside a mosque, he ordered that it be converted into stables. Copies of the Quran were thrown to the 4 winds, and the boxes that had held them were used as mangers. Then Genghis mounted the pulpit and berated the citizens about the treachery of their sultan and the reasons for his victory.
I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, he would not have sent a punishment like me.
Terrified by the accounts of massacres in China, the Bukharans awaited their fate. Unlike China, the sacking of BukHara was disciplined and controlled. Beneath this very minaret, thousands of people were put to death as a deliberate warning to others that there was no alternative to immediate submission. The city was stripped of its treasures and a tribute extracted from the wealthy families. Then most of the women and children were herded off to Mongolia. The city walls were then systematically destroyed, and refugees were dispatched to spread the news that BukHara had fallen. A large contingent of the male population was then herded out in front of his army, and with this human shield, Genghis marched on Samarkand. From behind these very walls, the citizens of Samarkand watched for the dust cloud of the approaching Mongols. The Kharazm Shah had already abandoned them. He had fled westward a few days earlier. The Mongols put to the torch that part of the city which lay outside the walls, and Samarkand surrendered within 5 days. Within just a few months, the Mongols had smashed one of the largest empires in the world. But there was still a personal score to settle. To seek out the Kharazm Shah, one of Genghis Khan's finest generals, Subadai, was dispatched to the west. Genghis himself turned south toward Afghanistan in pursuit of the Sultan's son and the remnants of the empire's army. His first purpose was still punitive revenge. When he rode past these Buddhas at Barmiyan, in the heart of Afghanistan, he was still in pursuit of the Kharazm Shah's son. When one of his own grandsons was killed here, he ordered the slaughter of the entire population. The terror that this unleashed had no precedent. Just as in China, those who suffered most were the peasants who worked the land. To a people who had never grown anything themselves,
if for 1,000 years to come no more evil befalls the country, yet it will still not be possible to repair the damage.
the cities suffered almost as badly. These are the foundations of a citadel built by Alexander the Great at Herat in western Afghanistan. After the Mongols had stormed the new citadel above, they butchered almost the entire population. News of this and other massacres spread like shockwaves to other cities as a warning that anything but complete submission would cost them dearly. Psychological warfare, and it worked. From then on, for every city that was wiped out, many others surrendered and were left unharmed. But nevertheless, the roll call of devastation was numbing. Persian chroniclers claimed nearly 2.5 million died here at Herat. At Naishapur, the chroniclers put the figure at 2 million. None of these figures can be taken literally, but they do indicate the enormous impact the Mongol invasion had on this corner of the Islamic world. The cold and deliberate slaughter of entire populations had no precedent in history. At Balkh, once a jewel of mosques and universities, nothing remains but the walls. Here at Tus, in Iran, even the walls have crumbled. Eventually, Genghis grew tired of the campaign, and at the shores of the Indus River, turned his army around and headed home. He was 55 and aware of his own mortality. But away in the west, his general Subadai was still far from finished with war. He had pursued the Kharazm Shah for nearly 500 miles, but the Sultan died before Subadai could get to him. So, with reinforcements, he took the long way home. He rode across to the Black Sea and the Ukraine. Finally, he struck eastwards across an unsuspecting Russia. Subadai's raid took him from the open steppes to the forests, from searing